We'll start with the approval of today's agenda. The agenda for this hearing has been divided into two segments. First, I will provide a presentation to the board concerning HB581, its potential impact and considerations that will affect my recommendation. In our second segment, we'll allow for public comment from those who have signed up with me as they enter the door. The rules of conduct articulated in the Gilmer County Board Policy BCBI, public participation in board meetings, will apply during these proceedings, and I'll go over those before we start. Our goal is to keep this hearing to 1 hour, but of course we're very easy to reach with any questions you may have, and we'll be having 2 more hearings in case you decide you want to give public comment at either of those. So, without any further ado, I will make a recommendation to the chair, if there are no questions, to go ahead and approve the called meeting agenda.
I have a motion to approve the agenda. Motion by Mr. DeBoer. Do I have a second? Second. Second by Mr. Pritchett. All in favor? Unanimous.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start our hearing today by giving a short overview of House Bill 581. There's been a lot of misinformation in the public, and it's a very complicated bill. And I want everybody to fully understand its features and ramifications and how members of the Board of Education may come to a decision regarding the opt-out provision. Hit the wrong button. There we go.
Oh my God.
So what is House Bill 581? It's also known as the Save Our Homes Act. It was passed to address property tax issues. It establishes a statewide floating homestead exemption that limits the annual increase of property tax assessments on homesteaded property according to the inflation rate. The inflation rate in the bill is defined as the annual inflationary index rate as determined by the commissioner. That commissioner refers to the Commissioner of the Department of Revenue. Your annual inflationary rate will be determined by one person according to a metric that has not been defined. In summary, property tax caps and homestead exemptions. House Bill 581 establishes a statewide floating homestead exemption that limits the annual increase in property tax assessments on homesteaded properties. It is based on California's Proposition 13. I remind you that California does pay some of the highest property taxes in the country. It creates the option of a special sales and use tax. The legislation authorizes a special tax aimed at providing property tax relief. It's called a FLOST, and it is subject to a local referendum just like an E-SPLOST or a T-SPLOST. School districts are not eligible for the FLOST. So whereas a city or county might engage in this and replace that revenue with a 1-cent sales tax, we do not have that option. It would just be a loss for us. The opt-out provision allows local governments and school districts to opt out of the exemption. To do so, they must adopt the resolution by March 1st, conduct 3 public hearings, and place advertisements in local papers and on our websites. One of the misconceptions that is out there, I want to emphasize this, is that this is a one-time local decision. Either you opt in or you opt out. There is no option later to get in, no option later to get out. Municipalities can create their own tax exemptions that are similar. I mean, the county or city could do a floating homestead exemption anytime they want, but this one is permanent. As part of ongoing efforts to reduce property tax burdens in Georgia on homeowners while increasing transparency and efficiency in the taxation process. So we all understand school districts work a little differently than most municipalities. Our current process is that the superintendent works with our district staff to develop a budget for the fiscal year. Then I present that budget to the Board of Education for their review and approval. Tax Commissioner prepares the county digest of taxable property, and based on the revenue needs of the district and the value of the digest, we calculate a millage rate that will result in the revenue that we require to run the school district. If that rate is below what we call the rollback rate, then we're fine. We can roll our millage down, as this board has done consecutively for the past 8 years. If that millage rate is above the rollback rate, then we have two options. We can count that as a tax increase, hold public hearings, and deal with that, or we can trim the budget a little bit to ensure that we get down below the rollback rate. And again, I would like to emphasize that the Gilmer County Board of Education has chosen to go with the defined rollback rate or lower for the past 8 consecutive years, resulting in the 7th lowest school tax millage rate in Georgia. 7th lowest, I'll say that again. It's not overly complicated, and it's very transparent for taxpayers. Taxpayers have the option of attending every public Board of Education meeting, all of our budgets, all of our purchase orders, every expense we have is a matter of public record. The public can be very well informed if they choose to be about all of our internal operations. Our locally elected tax commissioner maintains control of the digest. The person that you elect, the person you see in the cafe, that you sit next to at church, has control of the county digest. The locally elected board members are accountable to local citizens, and they control local taxation. People that sit before you now, accountable to you. Our locally elected board members ensure that students are appropriately served, taxpayers are duly considered in light of local economic conditions. And, you know, I like to say, if it ain't broke and it causes locally elected officials to be accountable to local voters, maybe we shouldn't fix it. Currently, Gilmer County has a plethora of exemptions. There are several there, including what I believe is the most generous over 65 school tax exemption in the state. It's completely, 100% completely exempt. Nothing in House Bill 581 will screw that up for anybody. It has nothing to do with it, and it will not change. But do remember that there are plenty of current local exemptions. And we'll come back to that in just a minute because it's relevant. What would House Bill 581 do to the Gilmer County schools? We ran backwards projections, and we figured out that if House Bill 581 had been in place already, it would have resulted over these years in a net loss of local revenue to the tune of $3.7 million. That looks pretty significant, especially when you consider what we spend that money on. But it's not really a true indicator of what would have happened, because as you can see, millage rate has continued to go down across those years. If I wasn't able to cut $3.7 million out of the budget because of the things that we spend that money on, that would have meant that the millage rate would have either stayed the same or risen to bring in the same amount of revenue. Speaking of revenue, let's talk a little bit about what we've lost over the past year. Our employee health insurance costs in 2022 were $11,940. That's how much the district pays for every employee's health insurance. Today, it's $21,500. And 2 years from now, we already know how much it's going to be. It's gone up. Those costs will be $25,900 per employee. So the inflation that everybody else is dealing with is affecting us as well. We've lost over $250,000 in federal funds this year. Primarily, and this is kind of odd, we are a high poverty school district, but the federal government gets their numbers for some of their determinations based on the census. So even though we have a lot of children in poverty in our district, we do have a lot of very wealthy people And that dynamic has caused us to lose federal funding that we could have used to serve those children. Every year, the legislature is kind enough to give us more and more unfunded mandates. Some of them don't cost a lot of money, some of them do. Only recently has it become normal for the state to provide any funding for school safety. I think we all know how important that has been, and we spend quite a bit of money on school safety. Like I said, inflation hit us all. Higher wages as property values go up here. We have to stay competitive in the wage department. We have to attract the best people away from other school districts. And we have to give the people we already have here, we have to pay them a living wage so they can still afford to live here. And construction costs, typically, they rise at a rate of about 3 to 5% a year. So anything we build typically costs more than the last time we built it. So let's do the math. Our annual budget is a little over $54 million. Our anticipated revenue this year is $51 million. We'll come back to that because that's going to be significant in just a second. 36% of what we get comes from the state. 4.7 federal funds. It's not a lot, but we need it. We bring in 11% of our budget from eSPLOST, but that money, we've already created a covenant with the community and the taxpayers about what that money will be spent on. So in the resolution that you approved for an eSPLOST, money can only be spent on the things listed in that. I can't use it for wages, band uniforms, health insurance, any of that stuff. It can only be spent on the things that the voters approved it to be spent on. 42% of our budget comes from local taxes. That's not just property taxes, but it's other sources as well. That runs out to about $22 billion. Now, like I said, 36% of our funding comes from the state. That's what we earn, depending on the number of students we have and the methods by which we serve. We earn $34.8 million. But see there where it says the local 5 mil share? The state says we're going to take the value of 5 mils and we're going to hold that back. That's why there's a 5 mil minimum for all school districts. But we're going to hold that back so that the local taxpayer can have some skin in the game. I don't particularly think it's fair because, as we all know, our 5 mil share has grown because the digest has grown exponentially as costs have gone up. So our QBE funds only come out to $24 million. So the state puts it on us to put more and more local money into the school district every year. So what are our local taxes used for? We use these local funds to supplement what the state and federal government doesn't provide. That can mean instructional materials, wages, services, health services, school nurses, counselors. Our teachers' local supplement of 13%. That's where this comes from. Additional teaching positions in high needs areas, coaching and academic supplements, art, music, and PE teachers, field trips, our utility bills, and degree raises for our employees. About 90% of our local funds are spent on wages. Since our people are our most valuable resource, if we lose significant amounts of local revenue, the cuts will hurt kids quickly. Because of the way House Bill 581 is written, we will lose a very difficult to determine amount of funding year over year. Some of the pros of opting out, and number one is really the biggest one for me, but the people of Gilmer County have retained local control over tax policy. House Bill 581 is a state law. And once you opt in, we are all of a sudden at the mercy of that state law. My understanding is there's already what the legislature likes to call a cleanup bill being proposed on the floor. Therefore, if we opt in and don't know what's in the cleanup bill, we could be subject to some things that aren't very positive for us as a community. It gives us continuous flexibility in revenue management. We're not obligated to bring in tax dollars that we don't need. The people sitting in front of you have the ability to control the millage rate at all times. Again, their track record is pretty solid. They've lowered the millage rate 8 consecutive years. You have the seventh lowest millage rate in Georgia. Other exemptions. Many school districts already have existing property tax exemptions, like we do, and they already have a substantial impact on taxable property. 30% of the homesteaded property in Gilmer County pays no school taxes. And the thing that a lot of people don't know is that I mentioned that 5 mil share earlier. So a person over 65 who pays no school taxes, not only do we not receive any revenue from that home, but it also costs us about $900 out of our state funds. So we lose twice. We lose the intended revenue and we lose it from our state funds because the state doesn't care if we give exemptions. To them, our exemptions are our business. They still want their 5 mils. Caesar still wants his share. So here's some frequently asked questions that I've got. And I hope some of this information puts your mind at ease, because I know it's a lot of information. But the first question that a lot of people have to me is, are you taking away my homestead exemption? No, absolutely not. Opting out of House Bill 581 leaves all current exemptions in place. Nothing changes. Will opting in result in lower taxes? Not necessarily, because as I said, school taxes are determined by the needs of the district. We don't just let the digest grow, keep the millage the same, and keep the change, and then just go spend it. If we don't need it, we don't let it. So if I have to bring in the same amount of revenue to run the district and pay the power bills, that means that the millage rate will necessarily go up, even if your valuation goes down. And I don't think that's very transparent to taxpayers. Why is local control important? Every community is different. No statewide solution can adequately and fairly address the needs of every town, country, and school district. And the only people that we can truly trust to take care of our citizens, our students, our taxpayers, our staff members are the people that we elect locally to keep the budget in check and set a reasonable millage rate. If House Bill 581 doesn't work for us, can we opt out later? No. Once you're in, you're in. And when they decide to change that law, I think we all understand this is a purple state. So whoever's in control of the legislature controls that bill. People that wrote it are doing it, are taking care of it now. But it might not always be that way. I think that's something a lot of people need to consider. House Bill 581, if it turns out to be great, can we opt in later? No, it is a one-time decision. But like I said, there is nothing in the law that prevents us from creating a similar or better locally controlled exemption. Will House Bill 581 cause any unforeseen problems? Yes, a lot of them. And these are the ones that we know about before there's any changes to it. Like I said, the state takes away 5 mils off our earned state funding. That is calculated on the entire value of the digest. Since it's a state law, but it's going to be considered a local exemption. So they're still going to get their 5 mils. So regardless, the valuation on your home may be limited to you when you get your tax bill, but the valuation on your home, when it rises, will still be there. It'll still be in the digest. It'll still count. And 5 mils of it will be taken away from the school district. So the school is hit twice. Restraining a school district's ability to control its revenue has the potential to affect its Moody's rating, making it more difficult and expensive to bond or borrow money. We recently completed a bond referendum and signed those papers for the purpose of not only finishing our Performing Arts Center, but building a new school. Because of our Moody's rating, which is extremely high. What is our rating now, Paige? AA2. That's extremely high for a government entity. And we do it because we have a track record and evidence of sound financial management from the finance department to the superintendent and to the board. But when we do this bond at the current rates, the money is almost free for us because our credit rating is so high. We pay very, very little in interest. So opting in has the potential to change that for us and cost us more money. Over time, this change will drastically increase the tax burden on recently purchased property, exacerbating our current housing prices and hurting the local construction economy. 581 only applies to homesteaded properties. As districts are forced to increase millage rates in order to bring in the same amount of revenue, commercial and non-homesteaded properties will experience disproportionate tax increases. So whereas your valuation may go down, if I have to raise the millage rate even slightly to bring in the same amount of revenue, your tax bill may not go down. But since it doesn't apply to the business, the convenience store down the street from you, they're going to pay more. And over time, that disparity grows and grows and grows. Hurts the business community, hurts people with non-homesteaded properties. Isn't this what the public voted for? Great question. The public voted for tax relief. I think that's what we all want. I pay taxes here. We all pay taxes here. Nobody wants to pay any more taxes than we have to, believe me. But I don't think the public voted for the negative consequences that it creates, because it means that, yes, our taxpayers might, and I do say might, see a very small reduction in their tax bill. But it also means the school district is very, very negatively affected. We lose money in several other areas that we can't afford to lose. Again, I do want to make sure that we all know, Mr. Chairman asked me to reemphasize it, that we have the 7th lowest millage rate in Georgia. That's a big deal. Big deal. We're at 9.415. Most districts are around the 12 to 14. There's a whole lot in the 14s. You don't get a 9.475 without a healthy digest and good financial management. We consistently produce flawless audits. We recently upgraded to Moody's AA2. Again, Gilmer Board of Education has rolled back its millage rate for the last of 8 consecutive years to a current level of 9.415. And along with the 65 exemption, Gilmer County already offers residents a very attractive palette of local exemptions. And one thing that most people don't know is that, remember when I said our budget is $54 million, but we only levy 51? We've done that for 2 years. The reason we've done that is because back during COVID, we were able to amass a bit of a bloated reserve fund. So, as I said, we don't levy taxes that we don't need. We didn't choose to blow that money on frills and nonsense. We have budgeted at a deficit of close to $3 million for the last 2 years so that we could dip into our reserves and lowered our millage rate by approximately about 1.5 mils in the process for 2 years, and essentially put $6 million back into the pockets of our taxpayers. Don't realize that because it's not a big news item. But here's what happened. 7th lowest in the state, and they're putting money back in your pockets, lowering it every year for 8. In my opinion, Gilmer County has a pretty good deal with the Board of Education to have. The public also voted to exempt residents over the 65 from school taxes years ago. And opting into House Bill 581 is an expensive proposition for us. I'll be the first to admit there's nothing wrong with floating homestead exemption. There are many communities in this state where this might be actually advantageous. This isn't one of them. We've already voted to exempt 65. That's what we decided to do. We can't afford that. It's going to make it very difficult. So in summary, opting out will not affect the 65 and over exemption. It's a one-time decision. Local people retain local control of local taxation. Personally, I just don't feel that the Metro Atlanta crowd and a bunch of South Georgia counties have any business having a say in how the people of Gilmer County levy taxes. That's exactly what House Bill 581 gives.
Amen.
Again, commercial non-homesteaded properties will not be excessively taxed if we opt out. Board of Education has rolled us back for 8 years. We have a multitude of local exemptions, and we have put $6 million back in the pockets of the taxpayers over the last 2 years. That cleanup bill is out there. I don't know what's in it. It's only the 5th day of the legislature. They can do a lot of damage in the next 35 days. Y'all met it. Okay. And approximately 30% of our homesteaded property already pays no school tax, and it reduces our state funding. That's our current law. That's fine, no matter how you feel about it. But it is what it is, and we have to move forward based on that information, based on that reality. And to do that, House Bill 581 puts us in danger of significantly reducing our local revenue across time. So I say to the board members, do you have any questions about the information that I presented before we turn it over to public comment? Yes, we've been talking about this a long time, haven't we? It's a lot. Well, in that case, I will we'll go ahead and start public comment if we have any.